Today we're going to do some practices on how to fix the iPhone 6 without a backlight. First, we will disassemble the phone. Before we actually disassemble the motherboard out of the chassis, we could simply use the multimeter to measure the connector. The measurement is we try to get the measurement of the resistance. As you can see, one of the pin on the connector, the measurement of the resistance is normal. It's lower than usual, so we have to check where the problem is. And then after that, we can just disassemble the motherboard. Since the components that's related to backlight problem is covered under the cap, so we will have to take off the cap first. We apply some heat with the heat gun and using the tweezer to simply just peel off the cap when the temperature is reached. Okay, first we will examine the difference under the microscope, and quickly we found this diode. It's like fried, it's damaged in appearance, so we will have to change it for sure. And normally in this case, not only the diode, but also the coil, the capacitors, but sometimes the backlight IC is damaged, will cause the same problem. And first we will have to apply some of the dissolvent that we bought a few days ago. It's a relatively new method. It's new method that we found it's pretty useful to simply just apply onto the underfill, and then wait about 15 minutes, and then we can simply scrape out with blade, scrape away all the underfill very easily. So we think that we will recommend for all the repair person to get in this dissolvent. We fast forward a little bit because this is just whole process of getting away all the underfill and also the cleaning. And we would try to remove all the underfill on the surroundings, because the underfill, when it gets hot, it might cause it expands, so it might cause that small components disconnect from the motherboard, and then after that we have to we have to deal with other problems. So we would recommend to simply just take off all the underfill at the same time. We apply some flux, trying to take off the diode, which we think it's obviously a broken one. In this case, we're simply just using the soldering iron tip to take away that damaged diode. And next, we would have to take the capacitors. There are 3 capacitors consist in on top of the backlight IC. Okay. Normally we would just take 3 of them off, but once you take them off, you could measure the resistance to check if it's back to normal. If it's not, just simply take the three of them off, and then the process is basically just clean up the motherboard. This 3 capacitor, the specification we could check under the schematics, and later on we will show just a little bit modify how we could simply simplify our jobs, rather than just put all the capacitor back. Right now it's about cleaning the motherboard, and we have to make sure all the tin is taken away by the week. Okay, after the capacitors, we now can take off the coil. This coil is pretty fragile. In many cases, it's caused by this coil. But since we're doing the practices or demonstration for this, so we would take this off as well. To take it down, we could apply some heat using a heat gun. The temperature is around 340 and the airflow is 40. And the coil is fragile, so we could use the blade to simply peel off from the motherboard, and then using the soldering iron to clean up the rest of the components. This is just taking off some of the extra underfill that we were unable to clean when the coil is beside the backlight IC. This is actually a common fault on iPhone 6 model, also iPhone 6 Plus. Okay, that's the coil that we would replace, and that's the capacitor, and also the diode. Just a moment, the diode is coming up. Here you go. And it's because the orientation we would start from the small components first, because when the coil is off, we get more space, so it'll be easier for us to soldering back this diode first. And we would have to apply some low melting point tin onto the motherboard first. And then because this component is very very close, it's just next to the CPU, so we could simply just using soldering iron to solder the diode back. And then next we are going to deal with the coil. First we will apply this soldering paste. It's a low melting soldering paste. The melting point is around 138. Don't apply too much, because yeah, that's a full demonstration. Don't apply too much. If you accidentally apply too much tin onto the motherboard, you have to take away some using the wick. The coil is actually next to the CPU as well, but since the dimension is quite big, heat gun still is the best choice for putting back this component. But keep in mind the temperature and the time duration of putting back this coil. Don't apply too much time onto the motherboard, and it's so close to the CPU, so we have to be very careful. Okay, this is the bigger capacitor. It's 10 UF and 25 volt capacitor. This is the modification that we mentioned earlier. We could use this bigger capacitor instead. First, we would use the UV mask to insulate the pin that is unnecessary. And and then we would apply some soldering paste onto the motherboard, and then later on it's for the soldering back this big capacitor. This end is actually GND, so it requires a little bit more of the tin than the other end. And it is some modification that we use. So we don't have to use too much. We don't have to put all 3 capacitor back. And after we soldering back this capacitor, we have to use the multimeter to check the resistance on both ends, make sure it's not shorted, and make sure it's connected well. Okay, the resistance is correct. Then we will measure this pin on the connector. And it's all back to normal now. But just before we put back the motherboard into the chassis, we would check it again using the multimeter. And when it's checked and the measurement, the reading of the measurement is correct, then we start to make our first tryout. Putting my all these connectors or antenna first before we actually plug in the battery. In this case, this screen is actually harder than usual to assemble for some reason. Alright, so yeah. Now the screen is coming up. Since we narrow down one problem. Alright, the screen is back. So